dirty old river must you keep rolling, flowing into
On a bitter December morning in London, 1966, beneath the humming studio lights, Ray Davies collapsed against the mixing desk, the golden boy of British rock suddenly trembling like a man twice his age. Moments earlier, his voice had glowed through the room. Now it barely whispered. Fame had crowned Ray as the poetic mind behind the Kinks, yet inside he was unraveling, haunted by a sister who died on his birthday, a band at war, and a darkness he could no longer outrun. Outside, the world demanded hits. Inside, his nerves burned, his sleep vanished, and every spotlight felt like a blade. And just when success should have saved him, betrayal, breakdown, and a band that exiled him from America pushed him toward the edge he'd been tiptoeing since childhood. This is the untold truth of Ray Davies. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Ray Davies' path into music didn't begin with applause, it began with numbers that didn't add up. 8 siblings squeezed into a modest house on Fortis Green, 1 overworked father, and 1 guitar that cost £12, the instrument Renee placed in Ray's hands on the morning of his 13th birthday, hours before she collapsed and died on the dance floor. That loss became the first crack in the psyche that would later define his work. By 1962, Ray was playing semi-professional gigs around London, earning barely £5 a night, often splitting it with borrowed musicians because he didn't have a stable band. He cycled through at least 4 different lineups before the Ravens, the early version of the Kinks, finally solidified with Dave Davies, Pete Quaife, and Mick Avery. Every rehearsal took place in cramped living rooms or garages where the volume regularly hit 100 decibels, loud enough for neighbors to file complaints. His encounter with destiny came in March 1964 when producer Shel Talmy offered the band a recording test. Talmy was not a mentor in the traditional Hollywood sense. He was a numbers man. He told Ray plainly, "1 hit. Just give me 1 hit." The pressure was immediate and measurable. A deadline of 2 weeks to write something that could break them through. Ray responded with a distorted 3-chord anthem built around an amplifier he slashed with a razor blade. The result? "You Really Got Me," recorded over 2 takes and mixed in under 90 minutes, hit Hashone on the UK charts within a month. Overnight, Ray went from anonymous pub musician to the reluctant frontman of a band selling over 100,000 singles a week. Yet even in that triumph, the seed of tragedy was already planted because the hit that made him famous also chained him to an industry that demanded he bleed for every song. At the height of the Kinks' rise, Ray Davies stood in a paradox. A man selling 100,000 records a week, yet sleeping barely 3 hours a night. Success did not lift him. It pressed down on him with measurable weight. By 1965, the band had logged more than 180 shows in a single year, and Ray's voice, the engine of their sound, was pushed to the point where doctors warned him of vocal fatigue bordering on collapse. But Ray ignored the numbers. He always had. What the public saw was dazzling. 3 top 10 singles in 9 months. Royalty checks totaling £35,000 before his 22nd birthday. And international tours booked out 6 months in advance. Yet behind each milestone hid the silent arithmetic of sacrifice. His marriage to Rasa was already fraying under the strain of constant travel, and Ray's perfectionist rewrites sometimes up to 20 drafts for a single lyric. The first blind spot emerged in June 1966, when Ray insisted on controlling every creative decision. In one notorious mixing session, he spent 11 straight hours adjusting a single vocal line while the others slept on studio couches. The engineer later described him as wired, sleepless, and staring like someone doing equations nobody else could see. That obsessive drive produced masterpieces, but it also triggered the prophecy of collapse. The omen appeared quietly at first. Ray fainted twice during the band's 15-city tour of Scandinavia, blaming it on flu. Then, in August, the real warning struck. During a session for Session Man, Ray suffered a trembling spell that lasted 6 full minutes, forcing the producer to halt recording. Ray dismissed it as nerves. Davies called it something else. Our brother's breaking point. Meanwhile, the cracks within the Kinks widened. Dave's onstage antics, Mick Avery's temper, and Ray's tightening control created a volatile chemistry. On the 19th of May 1965, Mick struck Dave with a steel hi-hat pedal, knocking him unconscious and requiring 16 stitches. Though Ray wasn't hit, the incident intensified his fear that the band his creation could implode at any moment. The external pressures hit even harder. In mid-1965, the Kinks were banned from performing in the United States after a dispute with the American Federation of Musicians. What should have been their gateway to superstardom evaporated in a single legal notice. The ban lasted 4 years, costing them an estimated $1.2 million in touring revenue and pushing Ray into what he later called a psychological freeze. Yet paradoxically, this exile created Ray's most brilliant illusion of power, the idea that he could build his own world. Over the next 2 years, he wrote more than 50 songs, many sketching the quiet despair beneath British life. He hid the turmoil behind concept albums, theatrical arrangements, and nostalgic characters, a glittering mask that critics praised, while Ray dissolved behind it. Every chart success deepened the rift. Every standing ovation tightened the knot in his chest. And as the decade approached its end, the Veteran began merging into a fault line. The tragedy wasn't coming. It was already spreading from within. Ray Davies' downfall did not arrive in a single dramatic explosion. It unfolded as a sequence of precise, measurable fractures, each one echoing an older wound. The first came from childhood. René's death on his 13th birthday, an unresolved trauma that resurfaced violently in the early 1972. During a tour in 1973, Ray admitted to a road manager that he had dreamt of her for 6 consecutive nights, each dream ending with the same image, her handing him the 12-pounds guitar before walking into darkness. Sleep deprivation became routine again, 2 to 3 hours a night, sometimes none at all before a show. But the trigger that detonated everything was the collapse of his marriage to Rosa. Their divorce proceedings in 1973 stretched over 9 months, and Ray later estimated losing thousands of pounds in legal fees and missed opportunities. Rosa left with their 2 children, and Ray's emotional state plummeted sharply. Bandmates recalled him arriving at rehearsals in the morning, not drunk, but hollow, having consumed up to 2 bottles of wine across long, isolated nights of writing. His weight dropped by nearly 15 pounds during that period, and friends noticed he wore the same overcoat for weeks, even in summer, as if hiding inside himself. Then came the grande reveal, the kind every Hollywood tragedy requires. In 1973, on stage at White City Stadium, Ray shocked the audience of 20,000 by announcing, "I'm retiring from show business." He walked off, reportedly in tears, after performing only 6 songs. Later that night, he was admitted to a hospital and monitored for 48 hours, the medical notes describing him as emotionally exhausted and borderline suicidal. The incident became known internally as the White City Crisis, a phrase Ray refused to repeat. The unraveling continued as old sins resurfaced. Ray's long-standing conflict with Dave, sparked by jealousy and decades of physical and verbal fights, reached its peak in 1979, when an argument backstage ended with Dave smashing a chair and security intervening. According to a tour accountant, the damage fees cost the band approximately £800, a trivial sum financially, but symbolic of a deeper collapse. 2 brothers unable to share the same room for more than 10 minutes without erupting. Meanwhile, Ray's artistic ambitions drove him into isolation. The Kinks' concept albums became increasingly elaborate. Preservation Acts 1 and 2 required more than 25 performers, staged narrations, and theatrical lighting rigs that cost upwards of £40,000, a significant financial risk for a band recovering from lost U.S. revenue. Critics dismissed the records as overwrought, and their commercial underperformance intensified Ray's anxiety. He responded by working longer hours, once spending 36 consecutive hours revising scripts and arrangements without food, leading to a collapse that required paramedics to administer fluids on site. The self-destruction grew more literal in the 1,980 seconds. Ray's insomnia evolved into full-blown bouts of disorientation. Band members described him pacing hotel corridors at 3 a.m., muttering lyrics into a handheld tape recorder. In 1982, after a grueling run of 52 shows in 3 months, Ray collapsed in Los Angeles after claiming he felt his heart stop for a full second. A cardiology check revealed severe stress-induced arrhythmia. Doctors advised a hiatus. Ray continued touring. But the darkest chapter arrived in 2004, far removed from his years of youthful meltdown. In New Orleans, while chasing a thief who had stolen his companion's purse, Ray was shot in the leg. The bullet fractured soft tissue, requiring 6 weeks of physical therapy and leaving him with intermittent pain that persists today. The gunman was never convicted. Ray described the moment as falling into a silent void, a phrase eerily similar to the way he once spoke of collapsing on stage decades earlier. Every thread of his life, the trauma of Renee, the implosion of his marriage, the violent infighting, the theatrical obsessions, the wandering insomnia, the stray bullet converged into one unbroken pattern. A man relentlessly dismantling himself, piece by piece, as if compelled by forces older than fame itself. Ray Davies' resurrection didn't arrive as a triumphant comeback, it came as a sequence of small, measurable victories that barely held him together. After the 2004 shooting, doctors predicted at least 6 weeks before he could walk normally. Ray forced himself back on his feet in 4, performing light studio work while still limping. The recovery didn't erase the trauma, but it marked one of the few times he fought against the darkness instead of feeding it. In the late 2000s, Ray returned to writing with a discipline he hadn't shown in decades. For Working Man's Cafe, he drafted nearly 40 lyrics, choosing only 12 for the final album, a sign of regained focus. By 2010, he was performing again, even after discovering blood clots in his lungs that required ongoing medical monitoring. Yet he refused to cancel his commitments, telling promoters he'd perform as long as I can breathe for 90 minutes. His final lesson wasn't carved into a single event, but into a slow realization. The world he built, the band he fought to control, and the fame that nearly killed him had all narrowed into one question. What truly breaks a man, the world outside, or the ghosts he carries alone? Ray never answered it directly. He let the music do it for him.